Tucker Carlson hosted documented white supremacist and race scientist Charles Murray on his daytime program. So it's not his very highly rated evening show, where maybe the network would be like, I don't know if we can have Charles Murray on, but maybe not, honestly. I mean, he's the author of The Bell Curve from the 90s. Argued that black people are inherently less intelligent and less worthy than white people, and that's why white people are more successful. Sounds pretty racist. And if you thought that he was discredited a long time ago or was maybe toning it down a little bit, no, he's still spouting the same stuff.
So that if you have, well, I have the data in the book. Essentially, you have registered nurses.
His data is always bullshit, by the way.
We have data on fairly large numbers of registered nurses, black and white. And the difference in mean IQ between the two of those is a dozen IQ points, which is a lot. It means you have a whole lot of extremely able black nurses. You have some incompetent white nurses, but it does mean you have a difference in job performance. And that's eventually going to be reflected in income as well.
We should pause just real quick. Let's just pause on like his use of IQ, which is a bullshit metric to measure anything like real intelligence. It's basically a culture aptitude test, and it's very cultured. Let's just put it that way. And so and entirely determined by a lot of cultural things like access to education, access to nutrition, and things like that. So like this is down to genetics is scientific racism. And I would just say, on the one hand, people like us call Murray a think tank gremlin who exists for a sole purpose of naturalizing hierarchies, particularly along racial lines. Other people like Sam Harris think he's one of the most unfairly maligned men of his lifetime. You determine which you find more persuasive.
Yeah, Charles Murray and Sam Harris are BFFs. They're often appearing on shows together, and Sam Harris is just a more sanitized version of Charles Murray. But like, let's not forget, this guy testified for Republicans on behalf of welfare reform. He's using the same justification IQ, as Matt pointed out, that was used in apartheid South Africa and was used throughout the eugenics movement, race science, etc. And just to make this super clear to people, as Matt said, IQ is heavily influenced by nurture in a nature or versus nurture debate, essentially, or not nurture. I'm actually not using that correctly.
No, but you're right. Like, there's something called the Flynn effect, which is that IQ just raises very, very quickly over generations, and it's clearly that this is because of rising like standards that are unequal, and that's why you see inequalities along racial lines, not because of the genes, which is just absurd eugenics.
Yes, poverty is the #1 factor in all of these like completely arbitrary metrics that Murray has hung his hat on for decades at this point and has not adjusted, which should tell you everything you need to know, because the agenda comes first and the science comes second. But continue.
And that's eventually going to be reflected in income as well. It's going to be reflected in the nature of their careers and the nature of how they end up and so forth. Same thing goes with virtually all kinds of jobs. The same thing goes for the kinds of jobs people end up in, so that you have entry into certain kinds of occupations is limited because the cognitive demands of those occupations mean that a whole lot of more white people qualify than black people, and even a higher proportion of Asian people qualify.
Just ludicrous.
People.
Yeah. Cognitive.
These are all differences.
Here's a simple pause it for a quick second. A simple heuristic is that to look at education, which I have a master's degree, so I'm allowed to say this, is that education is how privilege is laundered into merit. I didn't come up with that. I can't remember who exactly came up with that, but that's exactly the dynamic that explains what Charles Murray thinks is explained by different genes.
Keep going.
These are all differences which are driven not by irrational racism. They are driven by day-to-day realities of job performance and the responses of supervisors to job performances and the demands of the market. I'm not saying all of it, by the way. In all of this,
the responses of
these things,
like white supervisors.
Is Murray saying that racism is no longer a factor in American life? No. Racism is a factor in American life. I'm saying that you can't understand the size of the factor it is without understanding the proportion of the differences that are reasonable and logical and predictable.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, we kind of broke it down point by point in that area, but wanted to let you jump in, Binder.
I mean, it's, why did Tucker Carlson have him on now? I mean, it seems like this ties a little bow on their whole current campaign against critical race theory, right? Bring this in, say, we don't want to teach critical race theory. That teaches our children to hate America or hate a certain race, white people. But then you bring on Charles Murray, and it's like, but see, our side of things could be explained by science. And here's the one scientist who, the one guy who
he's not a scientist,
data, obviously.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I'm sorry. He's like what is he? A professor or a writer? What is he? Exactly?
He was like literally like a Rand. Maybe it's not Rand, but like one of those think tank AEI, one of those things. Like he's not a qualified scientist. And right. Really all that anybody who has had Charles Murray on or pushes what Charles Murray pushes, what they are doing is naturalizing a status quo created by white supremacy. And also capitalism largely, including like white supremacy as like the coup de grace of like Western capitalism, right? Like, so that's all this is. This isn't some guy just trying to find answers, and getting like unfairly maligned by college students like Sam Harris wants to suggest. This is a guy that has a project that actually there is a large unspoken and powerful contingency for white supremacy, like not like the Jan Sixers, but like people in boardrooms and executive suites that want to maintain like what was built by this country post Civil War, like after the failure of Reconstruction, which is like it helped create a white supremacist controlled world, basically. So I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. Mentioned white supervisors and their reaction. I mean, he completely negates the factor of, say you're a black person at your job, potentially you may have less opportunities because all of the people who are above you, or majority of whom, are white and have these same intrinsic attitudes or implicit ideas that are racist in nature. So like, the idea that he's operating in a scientific mode is hilarious to me, because he's only taking in one factor and one data point and then extrapolating everywhere, all over the place, which is IQ. And as Matt and I have discussed, that is a metric that is not applicable, and everybody, researchers who are credible, have poked holes in that as a measure of intelligence.
Yeah, even researchers who take IQ more seriously than we do think it's absolutely absurd the way that Murray deploys it.
Right. And we got an IM, which I thought was really, really good. Aaron is not cool says, IQ is like measuring athleticism by how many home runs you hit. How good would Messi be? It's super flawed. Yeah, well, exactly. If you're able to hit home runs, you've been training for a while, you have the bat, you understand the technique behind your footwork, etc., and you have the ability to train in a way that allows you to hit home runs. But guess, Odell Beckham Jr. or Randy Moss, they would not be applicable there. So thought that was a good way to put it. Aaron is not cool.
Son of a Maytag executive, in addition to his other stuff. He has actually Chapo Trapos has some really interesting Charles Murray stuff way in the early years about him going to Thailand and stuff like that. People might want to look into.
I came across Charles Murray recently, completely unrelated. Well, not completely unrelated, I guess, but I was looking into something. You guys know how that the COVID lab leak theory completely, like, sort of out of the blue started to gain traction again, and it was like all over the place.
Yeah.
Over these past few months.
Yeah, because some intelligence agencies released some info.
No, it was more so because of that, at least among media types. There was that post on Medium by that New York Times reporter Nicholas Wade. Did you guys see that? Like everyone who was a contrarian online was spreading that piece.
I missed that piece.
Right. And that basically, I think, a number of people shared it who I think you know who I'm talking about. And, that it was basically he was making the case and it convinced a lot of people to look further into it. And like, if you think we should look further into it, I tend to agree. Obviously, we should know everything that there needs to be known.
But we should also not act naive about why certain people like to really talk about this stuff in the absence of serious information. And the idea that we can't is ridiculous.
Right. Yes. But this guy basically put it all out there that like, and put this all out there in his piece, and it became like, oh, like this, how are we not looking at this all again? And really all he did was dress up. There was no new information in it. He just dressed up previous information and was just wrapping it up in a nice little, really long Medium article. And I looked more into him, and he had created a ton of controversy back in 2014 when he released a book called A Troublesome Inheritance: Genes, Race, and Human History. And he argued that racial differences and economic success were the outcome of genetic differences amplified by culture.
Sounds familiar.
And the scientists pretty much all together knocked this book, except for one guy, Charles Murray, who wrote a favorable review in the Wall Street Journal, who said that opposition to this book was motivated solely by political correctness.
Yeah, what he's always been saying, despite, I feel like he's actually debated Flynn of the Flynn Effect, or maybe it was a different guy citing it, but he's debated people who are clearly not like campus SJWs, just trying to have a revolution in America. People that are just actually fundamentally like devoted to the science, the posture that he has always carried, that has always just been a lie. And he gets watched by them, and it gets exposed as a racist by them, as over-interpreting data along racial lines. And that's just the racial stuff. He has a whole nother project where he naturalizes based on culture, like poverty in West Virginia. Like actually it's their fault for their bad culture, which is another thing with a long history. But this is who he is. He's not a serious person, and he shouldn't be treated like one.
Right. And, to go back to, for a quick second, because one of the things that is amazing to me about the Wade piece I was telling you about, the guy who wrote that book that Charles Murray gave glowing reviews to, one of the major points of reference as to why the COVID lab leak theory is believed by someone like Wade was seen in the Fauci emails, where there was this scientist who emailed Fauci. I think his name was like Alexson or something like that. Emailed Fauci and said early on, like, I'm looking at this, and from what I'm seeing, this really seems like something that leaked from a lab. And everyone who saw those emails when they were released was sharing this email along with all the other bullshit emails. But this one had some weight to it because the guy was an actual legit scientist. And no one who spreads this stuff, including, I think Wade does mention it in his Medium piece, to be fair, but no one who brings this part up, that basically is one of the backbones to the COVID leak conspiracy, is that scientist who emailed that to Fauci, he would go on to actually research COVID with a team. And then they would determine after researching that his initial belief wasn't true, and he came out and said and shared the research and shared his study and said, no, after I got a team together and we looked at it, I don't believe it came from a lab. I don't think it's possible. So, I mean,
that's indicative of how this stuff has been weaponized, Binder, like the ivermectin stuff too, right? Like Fauci saying there's like, maybe he would, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's emails like saying he might recommend it to certain family members. And like early on, there was a outside chance that like a drug like that could have some effect on COVID. It turned out not to be true. And just because Fauci thought maybe it was possibly true early on doesn't mean like, oh, it's been suppressed then and they got to Fauci, right? Like the people that get to people are people like Fauci, who's been there for like 4 decades, basically. He's not being intimidated to like suppress the truth of hydroxychloroquine. And did I say ivermectin? earlier? I meant hydroxychloroquine. Ivermectin's the new one.
Ivermectin's the new one, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I confused those. But ivermectin's the one where, okay, maybe there's an outside chance it does something. A lot of people are saying that's suppressed, but really we just need to study it more. But anyway.
Right. Yeah, you gotta love how like there's so like they don't believe in any of this shit except for the most like offbeat. Like it's just like you couldn't write it, and the fact that ivermectin's a new one this late in the game. Like I get in other countries that it's become big because obviously in other countries it's not late in the game for COVID, unfortunately. But like here, that conspiracy theorists here are like touting it. It's like, you guys really are, you know, what's your motive here? You're kind of late to this. Like no one here is really going to be going for ivermectin.
The truly pernicious thing about Murray isn't even that he's a racist and eugenicist, or it's that he uses his findings to conclude that intelligence stratification is immutable and thus abolish any race-conscious policies seeking to redress hundreds of years of systemic oppression. His racism makes him an asshole, but it's his policy goals that make him dangerous, says Thames Darwin. I thought that was well said. NJ Connor says there's a frightening pipeline that begins with people finding atheism, then finding the Sam Harris type science and facts and logic guys, then full IDW and even alt-right. Phil Torres wrote an article in Salon which detailed how so many prominent new atheists are now pushing alt-right thinking and talking points.
And the irony is, because something new atheists denied this entire time, and I literally bought, like in the 2000s, like one of the Richard Dawkins Foundation's Out Atheism t-shirts. Never wore it. But something they always denied, which is that they are a fundamentalism themselves. But it was absolutely true, because if you are trying to determine the state of the world based solely on people's holy books and reading them as the fundamentalists do, you are just reproducing that fundamentalism, right? Like, and so you get all these people that say Islam is incompatible with democracy, right? And that becomes basically like a new marching order. Okay, we got to just destroy Islam. Not to mention, like, oh, maybe we could look into all sorts of theocracies as, which is what somebody like Hitchens would say, and existed. Like I was a big Hitchens fan growing up, but he would give like the sort of polite gloss to this, right? Like that he could add some of that historical detail. But fundamentally, when you boiled it down, it was just Muslims are against us. And I think we can see in the context of how history has played out since, like the Iraq War, or the way Israel talks about Palestinians, like some of the national security impetus behind these narratives. And that was one thing, frankly, Michael was really good at deconstructing.